Welcome to my channel. My name's Jared. This is another Sunday update video. I also post silent build videos on Wednesdays, so be sure to check those out as well. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Ducati and then about the 356. Okay, so in my last build video, you would have seen that I did a kind of a full service on the Ducati. That's because, once again, I was waiting on parts for the 356. So we'll go over the Ducati real quick. So basically this is my 2016 Ducati Scrambler. It's the 62, which it means it's the 400cc version. The bike only has 2,000 miles on it. It had, I think, around 1,200 on it when I bought it a few months ago. And they had done an oil change on it then, but I went ahead and changed oil again. Basically, the timing belts that go under here are supposed to be changed on this bike every 7,000 miles or 5 years. So it only has 2,000 miles on the bike, but it is just now 5 years old. So I went ahead and changed those belts. I thought it was going to be difficult. People online made it sound like a pretty scary thing to do. It wasn't difficult at all. It was extremely easy. It went very fast and smooth. The kit that I bought came with an air filter and an oil filter and a new spark plug, so I changed all that stuff as well. By far the hardest part of this whole service was the air cleaner. It was very difficult to get this cover off to get to the air cleaner. And then of course, once I finally got it off, I discovered the original air cleaner was perfectly clean. I mean, it wasn't dirty hardly at all. So it was just fine. And like I said, the oil had been changed before I bought it, but I went ahead and changed it again just so I know everything is current. So anyway, that's something I've been wanting to do. And I had a little bit of time because, as we're gonna go over now, I was waiting on some parts for the 356. Okay, so as you can see, I'm working on assembling the engine for the Porsche. I've got the heads back from the machine shop. They've been rebuilt. I've got the new camshaft. I've got the crank, which was polished by the same company that did the heads. I've got new lifters. So everything's ready, and I went to put it together and I made a mistake and it cost me time and quite a bit of money. So what happens is, I mentioned before that the bearings that came out of the engine were in really good shape and I was going to reuse them because they're kind of expensive. And also I like the idea that we know that everything fits. The tolerances are all correct because they came out of an engine that clearly ran. They did have some wear. So I was going to reuse these bearings, but in the process of putting it together, I damaged them. So this is what happened. So on this end of the crank, there's a bearing that goes on the crank and then drops into the engine. This bearing mounts into the third piece. You can see the old one is still in there. And then on the middle two bearings, they go into the two crank halves. There are 4 pieces here. Well, when I put these into the block, this end near the flywheel has that 1-piece bearing that goes on the crankshaft, and this end has a 2-piece bearing. Well, I put one of these halves on one side of the case in this section right here. So it fit perfectly. There were the necessary grooves for this tab to fit. So there must be maybe a 2-piece option, because for some reason the bearing fits there exactly the way that it would fit on that side. And I got confused. So I had this half on the engine stand with the crank on it, all set up correctly, but I just switched. I should have put this half right over here on the engine, and I put it right here on this side of the block. And then I went to put this side onto the other side, and it was a little bit snug going on, but there are several different pins that kind of align the two halves. So I assumed one of those pins just needed to be a little bit motivated to go in. I thought I'd tap on a little bit here to get that to set down on those pins. And also I thought maybe some of these studs might be slightly not straight. And so I wasn't shocked to have to tap it down a little bit to get it to seat. But the problem was I didn't realize this bearing was sitting on top. So what happened is this bearing that was on the crank, you can see this damage here and here. This bearing came down on top of it. And then I tapped it down and I damaged the outside of this bearing. And I saw that and I fixed it. I moved this over to where it should be. And I thought, well, this isn't too bad. It's on the outside of the bearing. I'll just go ahead and put it together. But when I put it together, it wouldn't spin over anymore once I torqued it. It spun fine until I torqued it. I was checking it as I was going to make sure it was still spinning correctly. And it spun just fine. But once I torqued it, it wouldn't spin. So of course I took it back apart. And this half that got crushed down on here was crushed a little bit on the two sides here. And so that was the main issue. That was then pressing against the crank here, and so that's what was keeping it from spinning. So you can see, maybe you can see this if it focuses. You can see I kind of tried to file this in down a little bit, and I almost thought about trying to salvage these bearings, but ultimately I didn't do that. I ordered a new set. It was $550 for a new set of bearings. And like I said, these bearings were in good shape. They were definitely usable. But, you know, I got in a hurry. I made a silly mistake. And so that cost me $550 for the new bearings. Now, the nice thing is now it has new bearings. So I'm not depending on used bearings, even though they were in good shape. But so anyway, that's what's going on with the engine for the 356. And that's why there wasn't a build video out on this car. That's why the Ducati project came out. I mean, like I said, I have been wanting to do that maintenance on the bike for a while anyway. So it was nice to give me the opportunity to do that. But, you know, it did, this little hiccup set us back just a little bit on the 356. But in the end, it's going to be just fine. Now they have new bearings. Everything's going to be fine. Now, I did, because these are new bearings, I wanted to go ahead and check the tolerances to make sure everything was correct. So I have the shop manual. I'll kind of go over quickly how you do this. So here are the allowable tolerances for the bearings. And what you do is you take this guy right here and you set it for the size of the shaft, right? And then there's this gauge, and I have it inside the engine right now. There's a gauge that's right inside here, and I'll try to show you how this works. So as we move this gauge, you have to kind of rock it to get it exactly centered. So you can see here, this is kind of rocking inside that bearing. And what you can see here is this point right here where it stops. That's the difference. So I set this gauge at 0 based on the measurement that I took off of the crankshaft. And now by doing this, you can see that this 5 is the difference. So from here to here, that's the gap between the crank and this bearing. Now you can see I've got this mark here. I've marked this. This is the limit. This is the wear limit. So from here to here, that's the tolerance limit for the maximum wear for a bearing. So if the bearing were worn out, it would be beyond this limit here. And you can see it's nowhere near there. It's only about 1/3 of the way there as far as the gap goes. So that's correct. And I've done that on each of the bearings for the crank. I'll pull this out here so you can kind of see. Yeah, so this is what it is. And then this, it just it compresses in. And then you can see that's how you get your measurement. Okay, so now I'll show you real quick how you set this gauge up. I mentioned that I set this to 0 based on the size of the crankshaft. And what you do is you put this in here. It's kind of difficult. You want to have that in a vise or something so you can hold it straight. And then you squeeze this together and you put it in here. And again, you have to rock it like this to get to make sure you're at the widest point or the narrowest point, I guess. But you can see up here, as I'm rocking it, you can see where that gauge is ending. Let me get it back in there. You can see here, see when I'm rocking it, it's hard to do with while holding the camera. You can see right there where I'm rocking it ends at the 0 mark. Right, so that's how you zero it out. So that's how you measure the shaft with this. You set this dial based off of that measurement you took, and now that's at 0. And then you can find out the difference between the shaft and the bearing. So that's that. So that's how you check the bearings. I wasn't actually going to do that, or I didn't do that before because, like I said, I knew those bearings had already been in the engine and they already ran. And also, unlike the Land Cruiser that I did, there's no way to adjust these. So the Land Cruiser, I did the same process, but on that engine, there were shims that you would put over the bearing caps, I guess they would be called. So on that engine, you had to keep going back and forth and adjusting that gap to get it to where it was supposed to be. But on this engine, there's no adjustment that I'm aware of. It either is correct or it's not correct. And of course, the crankshaft was checked at the machine shop and polished, and the bearings are brand new, so you would definitely expect it to be correct. And I checked it, and of course it is correct. So we're looking good there. And now I can get this thing back together, and we'll keep moving forward from there. I've got the new pistons and cylinders. And like I said, I've got the heads have been rebuilt. So I think I have pretty much all the stuff I need to get it together. So hopefully in our next build video, we will see this engine being pretty much fully assembled. So anyway, that's it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Thanks. Bye.